Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So of course our first indication of what the final shape was going to feel like in any moment in time was when Crow finally fell through that portal and ended up in a gunfight with the newly resurrected Cayde 6. Of course this resulted in Crow down in the dirt with Cayde ready to deliver a killing shot in retribution. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of Glint and Cayde's sudden realization that Crow wasn't actually the same man that had killed him before, Cayde might have prematurely ended any of our chances of entering the Pale Heart and stopping the Witness. But there's a period of time between this moment and our own arrival, along with Vanguard forces, into the Pale Heart that left Crow and Cayde in each other's company. And in this period of time, alone with the man who had been reborn with the face of his murderer, Cayde genuinely contemplated for a second time whether or not he should just take a chance to return the favor for good and end Crow's life as he slept. It isn't exactly hard to understand Cayde's position here, even after he is shown definitively by Glint's presence that Crow is different from Prince Uldren. I say that because a lot of people in the community initially started out by hating Crow in his initial resurrection because he had yet to show his true character and to show how different of a person he was from his former self. This isn't just reflected in our real-life community though, it's also reflected within the lore of the game itself. We sometimes forget that players are often analogues for our own Guardians and how they would interact in the lore. We tend to jump around in the tower and play with the purple ball. They do that in the lore tabs as well. And equally, Crow had run-ins with Guardians who were just as angry about his presence there as we were in real life. He ran into them many a time on the Tangled Shore. This was before his time of employment by the Spider, but shortly after he was resurrected by Glint. He encountered a few Guardians. The results of each was almost universally the same, and one example of this is recorded in the Tangled Web lorebook, along with Crow and Glint's other adventures in their early days. The excerpt in question reads as follows. "How do you feel about Gleam?" he asked. "Flash, or maybe Glint?" "Glint?" A rainbow of colors played across the ghost's eye. This usually meant he was calculating complex enemy behavior, determining combat outcomes, or mapping hundreds of bullets and their millions of possible trajectories. "Oh, I like Glint." The Lightbearer drew to his feet by the fire and bowed deeply. "Then it is an honor to meet you, Master Glint." He reached out a finger and wiggled one of Glint's points in greeting. The absurdity of the gesture delighted the little ghost. "And now that you have a name," said the Lightbearer, "perhaps I will be more open to ideas as we search for mine." Glint dipped in the air, acknowledging his partner's progress. The pair smothered their fire earlier than usual that night. The next morning, a passerby saw Glint's Lightbearer without his helmet. The Titan beat him mercilessly with her flaming hammer, snapping his collarbone and crushing his pelvis. He died hours later of internal hemorrhage. Glint brought him back, and the pair traveled in silence for a long while. This is the reason why Crow had to wear a mask initially, and had to be under his hunter cloak all the time. There were other Guardians who would quite literally kill him on sight because of their utter outrage at what Prince Uldren had done. They believed Crow to be responsible for this. Crow's had to live with that indignity for a very long time. Whilst he has been accepted in the last few years thanks to his valiant action in saving Zavala from Scion assassins, that difference in character between Crow and Uldren Sov wasn't always known, and so I doubt that this is the only time that this has happened to Crow. But of course, even over these 5 years of change, we would realize that Crow was indeed a different person from Uldren, and we would eventually soften to him and make sure that we understood him to be a different person. But of course, Cayde wasn't here for any of that, and more importantly, the last memory he experienced in his real life was a trauma that most of us Guardians won't know, and that's dying a final death. The only other person who can claim to experience a trauma like that is Saint 14, or maybe Toland the Shattered. Saint 14 thanks to the fact that he's reclaimed the memories of another version of himself, and Toland the Shattered because he deliberately sought out his death and was somehow able to live onwards in the Ascendant Plane. But maybe even Toland doesn't count there because his death is not true in that sense. And even with all of that considered, neither Saint nor Toland died to then immediately wake up again face to face with their killer. Cade even comments on the nature of his meeting with Crow upon his own rebirth in the Pale Heart, and states that the experience was a traumatic one.
I woke up here in this body alone. No ghost, no way to use the light. And what could make this traumatic experience better than finding my killer waiting for me? But we talked it out because we're adults. He seems nicer these days. Yeah, pretty low bar, I'll admit.
Now, doubtless, Cade is one to play things off like this with a bit of humor, but make no mistake, he's right to call that entire ordeal a traumatic experience. He's basically being told by the universe and by circumstance, your killer is right in front of you, but your killer is actually the good guy, and if you don't work with him, the ultimate evil over yonder is going to snuff out both of you. Suck it up, Buttercup, the galaxy is at stake again. And you can imagine how that creates a complicated barrel of feelings. It's a pretty good thing that Crow and Cade had the whole of the Final Shape campaign and the wildcard mission to work through all of that, because if they didn't, I don't think Cade would have properly passed the torch of Vanguard leadership to Crow. In fact, as I alluded to at the start of the video, he was actually pretty close to extinguishing Crow's light for good. And once again, thanks to Glint, he was able to stay calm and rational, thus preventing utter calamity. We can see proof of this interaction in the lore of the Still Hunt, every hunter's favorite new other golden gun, the exotic of the Final Shape, the one that truly defines it, I would say, even after it's been nerfed. That excerpt takes place shortly after Crow and Cade joined forces in the Pale Heart. It reads as follows. Cade 6 spends the first night of his rebirth staring at the man who murdered him. The prince he once knew as Aldrin lies with his back to Cade, head on his arm, cushioned by soft grass. Under a sky without stars, granite boulders are scattered like vast marbles, nestled among the tall prairie grasses. A safe, silent valley born in the moment of their arrival. Time had grown oily without the familiar cycles of Earth, and after hours of half conversations and stunted questions, the other man had excused himself to rest. Aldrin sleeps soundly, vulnerable. Cade leans back against a boulder, arms crossed in the half-shadow of the fire between them. An impulse curls through him, dark and wild. It would only take a moment. He could put a shot straight through the ghost's shell, then improvise a garrote with a handful of prairie grass and strangle the man while looking him dead in the eye. Or crush the ghost with his hands to stand tall and powerful over the sleeping figure and relive his own death from his killer's perspective. Better yet, he could capture the ghost, set the man free and hunt him in furious pursuit. Cade flinches and looks up to see his murderer's ghost hovering in place, watching him, illuminated by the flickering coals of a dying fire. A motionless, protective stance. Cade narrows his eyes. His hand slowly moves to his gun. Ghost and Exo stare through one another. The man beneath the ghost stirs but does not wake. Then, in a fluid motion, the ghost glides past his guardian's cheek, silently approaching Cade. It draws close. "I'm sorry about Sundance," whispers the ghost. Cade stills at her name. His hands and his gaze drop to the ground, pinned there now by a heavy shame. "Thanks," is all Cade can muster. He looks at the sleeping man nestled on the grass of the inside of a god and sees nothing of Aldrin. "Crow," Cade reminds himself. That's Crow. Brutal as some of the thoughts in Cade's head are, I don't think I can blame him for the rollercoaster of emotions and rationalizations that he had to go on in order to reach the point where he trusted Crow. In fact, I think it was the only way this could possibly have played out. Crow needed to prove himself worthy of Cade's trust, and with an advocate like Glint at Crow's side, one that was imminently concerned not just for his guardian but also for Cade, things were always going to be made a lot easier. Most importantly of all, Crow needed to disprove the notion that Uldren Sov and he were the same person to put Cade at rest. And yet again, Glint was living proof of that notion. All Guardians lose their memories when they die and are reborn in the Traveler's Light. They know nothing of their first life. Uldren Sov was a mystery to Crow until Savathun's memories of Uldren were returned to Crow. But even so, Crow confronted those memories with shame. And so, when he and Cade saw each other again, there was a quiet recognition from both of them that the man that killed Cade long ago was also gone.
You died.
So did you. Yeah, I don't have to call you Prince anymore, do I?
So that's the story of the second time that Cade nearly killed Crow. And thank goodness he didn't. As I said earlier, if he had decided to dispatch of Crow and kill Glint, we'd have been unable to enter the Pale Heart and stop the final shape. And we'd never have laid eyes on the glorious power of the weapon that Cade gave us, the Still Hunt, a weapon that I think we can all quietly acknowledge was the true destroyer of the Witness, and the ender of the final shape. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. What would you do in Cade's position? I still understand the apprehension with which some of those actions must have fallen into Cade's head, but I also understand that there is certainly a degree of hatred that comes along when you're missing 5 years of context and you've seen none of a person's growth. It's important perhaps to recognize those factors, and to also recognize Cade's strength of character, because even as he was thinking these thoughts, eventually it took real empirical evidence to show him the hard truth, and he didn't shy away from that. He acknowledged that he was wrong internally and even felt shame. That's the sign of a person who knows they are fallible, and as a result, who knows a little humility. Let me know what you think. And if you want more stories from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Por audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.